IBS Intelligence Sales League Table 2020 webinar, Findings and Insights. First of all, I trust everybody is safe and well against the backdrop of the pandemic. COVID-19 has turned our world upside down, but my goodness, from the perspective of tech implementation, it has turbocharged changes in customer behavior and also the need for change amongst financial institutions. So right now, the iconic IBSI Sales League Table is back and bigger than ever. In this webinar, we'll be revealing the what, where, how, and why of the IBSI Sales League Table 2020, including how it was compiled and curated, the insights it provides on the evolution and state of the banking technology industry, and the perspective it offers on activity levels in different global markets. We'll be running through the findings of the SLT in this webinar, but if you want the full details, please go to ibsintelligence.com and order a copy of the IBS Journal June edition, which contains the full analysis. Okay, that's the advertisement out of the way. My name is Robin Amlot. I am the managing editor of the IBS Journal. In a career spanning some decades as a financial and business journalist, I've worked across all media forms, print, broadcast, online, as a thought leader, presenter, and producer, but you're not here to listen to me bang on about myself. I'm joined by Ramkumar Venkataraman. He's the senior partner at Cedar Management Consulting International, a key member of the IBS Intelligence leadership team, and chair of the Sales League Table panel. Cedar, as you probably know, is IBS Intelligence's parent company. Ram himself has over 20 years experience in assisting global financial services clients with business strategy formulation and transformation engagements, including organizational, process, and technology transformation. He's helped several clients in formulating their business-aligned IT strategy and also with their application, selection, and implementation. Specifically, he's helped in the selection and implementation of core banking and other critical solutions. Most banks perform a core transformation once in a couple of decades. Ram has executed 25 large core banking transformations overall, so he knows what he's talking about. COVID has thrown the need to invest in tech in sharp relief and also makes our Sales League Table more important than ever as a benchmark. All the companies and all the solutions that feature in the SLT have one thing in common: successful business in the year in question. So that's enough from me for now. I'm going to turn over to you, Ram, please, to give us an overview of the Sales League Table 2020.
Thank you, Robin. Am I audible there?
Yes, indeed.
Excellent. And I presume my screen is visible to all to see there.
Looks that way to me.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that introduction there, Robin, and thank you a lot of our patrons, the suppliers, more importantly, the banking community who have logged in today to actually get to hear more about what we have to say. So before we jump into the, into the larger discussion today on who's leading and how things have unfolded, maybe we should start with a little bit of an overview to what the Sales League Table is all about. And maybe I should spend some time to give a little bit of history to the Sales League Table and where we are. And I guess it's come a long way from where it started 18 years back. So why don't I start with a little bit of an introduction, so we all get to hear about, what is it all about and why is it so iconic? To start with, I think we have a track record of more than 18 years. And I know for a lot of banks that actually make investment decisions, the Sales League Table is the barometer, the most definitive leaderboard benchmark, as we call it, in making their decisions on what should be the investment they should make and why. Over the years, we've had the benefit of, covering deals that are reflected in bank purchases from countries more than 150. Over the years, we have more than 250 plus solutions from various solution providers that have been profiled. We have about 5,000 plus global banks historically whose purchases have been profiled in the SLT, and over the years it has also resulted in having more than 15,000 plus system purchases that is reflected there. If I was to talk a little bit of the legacy and why is it so critical, for the different stakeholders, to start with, you do have a benchmark, the quote unquote, the benchmark that suppliers vie for. It is a global barometer of true quantified real sales performance. It's purely quantitative and validated. It allows them to benchmark their performance on a year-to-year basis on a global scale. But if you look at the banks, it provides the banks with actually an ability to look at where the investments are to be made, what are the trends that are happening, where are the insights with regards to vendor landscape, and more importantly, it becomes an ability for most participants to actually have a larger market reach and a better visibility. Over the years, we've had the privilege of most marquee banks whose deals have actually been reflected in the purchases that have been made across different categories by various providers of solutions, which have been profiled in the sales league table. And more importantly, if I look at the evolution, we started all the way back in 1991 when the sales league table was first launched. It has always been historically a conventional back office sales league table, and it used to be meant for international sales league alone. And then we discovered along the way that the deals that are to do with countries that have a very large number of small banks tend to actually have deals or purchases made with suppliers who are providing their solutions for the domestic segment. And because the number of those deals were significantly large, it was kind of having an impact, or should I say a skew in the way the international deals were being observed or let's say ranked. Hence we introduced a series of what we call as domestic sales league tables. We started this with Russia, the USA and India, where the number of deals made by domestic banks with domestic suppliers are of significance. Over the last few years, we've also been introducing a number of new categories, also in line with what banks are looking to make as investments, be it on the digital space, the risk space, and you do find a lot of investments as we see today in the area of payments, investment and fund management. And because payments actually got to even get finer in the way they are being invested in by banks, we've got them to be further subdivided into retail payments and wholesale payments. And this year we also brought in a category for transaction banking. Let's look at this year's SLT 2020, a quick bird's eye view. If you were to compare this year's SLT with last year's, it's actually heartening to see that the numbers have gone up almost in every single metric that one can look at. The number of suppliers participating is gone up by 17%. And if you look at the solutions, that's also gone up by 20% there. We have 240 solutions from about 62 suppliers. There are about 150 countries where deals that have been reported have been evaluated across 14 categories. We did evaluate close to about 2,500 deals. Different matter that not all of them did finally qualify, or roughly about 30% of them did not qualify to actually be counted in the SLT, and we'll explain those reasons as we move along. But suffice it to say that there is a very strict validation process where we look at the deals carefully, and what you have there is a conclusion after those analysis. And we have close to about 1,700 banks from about 150 countries who've actually been, whose deals have been profiled in the sales league table this year. If you look at the categories, like I mentioned before, historically, the sales league table was focusing on the universal banking, which is core banking with end-to-end, retail banking, treasury and capital markets, which was primarily seen as wholesale, private banking and lending. These were the categories that were historically, should I say, called as conventional deals that were reported. But over the last few years, and even more so this year, we've seen a lot of impetus on the new focus areas: investment and fund management, digital banking channels. As I mentioned, we've split payments into retail and wholesale payments, risk management, compliance management, and this year we've got transaction banking. What we also do is, in order to look at the performance on a slice of Islamic as well as digital only banks, every single deal that gets reported gets to be identified if it's for conventional or for Islamic, and if it is for what we call as a digital only bank or for the conventional bank. And those have also been profiled there, besides the domestic SLT, which we spoke about a little while ago. Some of the suppliers who participated this year, as you see, there are 62 suppliers, and these are who's who, marquee global leaders who've been operating in the banking technology space, many of them for many, many years. And that's the profile of the competition that SLT provides as a platform. They don't call it as the global barometer for no reason. And some of the banks whose deals have been profiled this year are here. These obviously cut across categories, they cut across regions, and they cut across suppliers. Now, we talked about geographies. I think it's very interesting to see how the deals have unfolded this year. You would find that we have sliced the global participation across 4 broad regions. The Americas, which contributed to most number of deals, about 45% of deals. But you would also notice that a very large percentage of those 45% deals were to do with what was domestic deals within USA, which is exactly the reason why we have culled out the domestic deals and profiled them separately. But what you're seeing on this page is the total number of deals globally across both domestic and international deals across the region. So you do find that Americas contributed to 45%, followed by APAC, which includes India, roughly about 27%, followed by both Europe and Middle East Africa, which contributed to 13 and 15% each. Now, what's interesting here is you would find that the donut has 2 colors. The brown represents what's conventional, which we spoke about earlier, the core banking, the lending, the retail, and the treasury deals. And what you see in the green is what we call as the new focus areas, including digital payments, transaction banking, and the likes. It would be very interesting for everyone to note here that if you were to look at the profile of deals broadly, and more particularly in APAC, Europe, and the Middle East Africa, you would find that the number of deals that relates to the new focus areas are significantly more than what it is for the conventional. It indicates the trend. It does give you an insight on where the world is moving. Robin did talk about how COVID is impacting us. And I may dare say here that if digital is the way to go, we already are seeing those offshoots in those numbers there that you're seeing around the world. Moving along, if I further sliced the conventional back office deals, you do find they actually get broken down between the universal core, the wholesale treasury, retail, lending, and private. And you see those numbers, how they stack up over the years. And what's interesting is that the lending number have gone up as a share of the pie, although the pie indeed on itself had grown by about 10%. You do see that the lending number has gone up as compared to last year. True indication of what we're seeing as the investment that banks are making in specialized lending systems. And if I was to further analyze them Across the 4 regions, you do see here that the numbers, and these here we're talking about only the conventional back office. We aren't talking about the new focus areas, and we aren't talking about the domestic deals. These are pure international deals. And you do see that the numbers by and large have been somewhat similar. So although there is a marginal increase or decrease, but for a large, part of the world, the numbers are almost similar, excepting for Europe, which has seen a bit of an increase from 70 last year to about 93. And talking about new focus areas, I did mention about how the digital share is actually increasing, and that's really what you see there. And that kind of brings us to the end of an overview session, but I take you back here to Robin to take us further on the conversation here. Over to you, Robin.
Thank you very much, Ram. Thank you for that information. So 240 solutions, 62 suppliers. We should tell people where we get this information from. How are we compiling the sales league table?
Thank you. I presume many of the audience here are quite aware, but I guess it's important for us to understand how the SLT...
We need to spell this out.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The starting point of this definition is in being clear on what it is not. The SLT is not a qualitative assessment of suppliers or their products. It's a quantified basis of ranking suppliers based on their real validated sales performance. So what we really do here, Robin, is we actually have suppliers making their submissions of what their sales performance in the previous year. For example, in this case, it's deals that have been done between January 2019 till December 2019, which are then validated by an SLT panel on a deal-by-deal basis. This is no exaggeration. We take almost 3 months to go through a very diligent process of validating every single deal if they actually are conforming to what we actually call as a fair apple-to-apple comparison that the SLT framework allows you to have. Remember, this is not about having another module sold to the same bank, or it's not about extending the deal to 3 more countries where you actually already have got a presence in a bank. So you're not then having a competitive comparison. So what we do here is we look at new name deals that are based on an RFP where banks have invited international competitive bids, and this really profiles what banks have chosen. So when you see a leader actually having a certain rank, that's an indication of that many banks having preferred that solution over the other. If that answers that question, Robin.
It answers the compilation question, and you've gone some way, but I want you to spell out more detail, please, in terms of what we do to curate the submissions to the SLT. You've talked a little bit there about that, but can I ask you to expand on that so people are crystal clear on how the submissions are managed?
Sure. I guess there are 3 parts to the curation here, and I'll probably go step by step here. The first part is where we validate if the deals are indeed valid. And there is a clinical process that goes in there. So when someone makes a submission that does not belong to the 2019, for example, period, and we have our ways and means of validating if the deal was indeed recorded this year, or was it before, or was it, if it's not representing the right clientele. So for example, you have deals that actually belong to non-banking or non-financial services segments which aren't actually getting counted. So the first process is to validate if the deals are indeed belonging to what we call as the SLT framework. The second part of it is where we actually go through a process of validating the deal in terms of its sanctity. So suppliers need to provide evidence to confirm that this deal was indeed a deal that got signed or executed. And there are a number of ways in which we get the validation done, including having conversations with banks who actually have made those investments. And the third process is where we look at the nuances of those deals and validate if they belong to the same product category. They are represented accurately in terms of its definition of whether it's a conventional or an Islamic, if it's actually belonging to a pure play digital bank or a conventional bank, does it actually represent the category that it is being subscribed for? So the process that goes in is a diligent step-by-step process. And the deals actually get validated with the respective suppliers before they finally find their place in the SLT. In other words, if you are a bank that is looking to make a decision, or let's say you're making a comparative of the suppliers, then you could be rest assured that what you are seeing here as a comparison is a genuine apple-to-apple verified, validated comparison. I think that's the hallmark of the SLT process, Robin.
Okay, well, before we're putting this off a little bit, I appreciate for some people, but before we actually get to what systems have been the top performers, as it were, for 2019, we've broken down the suppliers into two categories, the SLT Leadership Club and SLT Stars. So we should probably explain to people what those are.
Of course. So I guess it's a very important question. Over the years, we've actually been recognizing the top performers in the leadership in the various categories. But what is important to understand here is anyone who actually is a participant of an SLT is actually confirming that they have been alive and kicking and have actually been bought by their customers. Their solutions have actually been invested. And it is very critical for banks to actually be making an investment where the leaders whose performance actually is validated, and the leaders that you get to recognize here are those who have qualified to be the number 1 or 2 position in those respective categories. That's point 1. And point 2 is for those who actually have got the next best performance but haven't been belonging to the leadership are qualified as SLT stars, which is also to recognize performers who actually have delivered their performance in the previous year. So it's a recognition of leadership both in the leadership club as well as what we call as SLT stars there.
Okay, well, we can't put this off any longer. Let's get into the detail of it. Let's find out what systems are in the Leadership Club, what systems are SLT stars. So, ladies and gentlemen, the leaderboard results. Let us begin with our first category, Universal Core Banking System. So and I think it's important to spell out here, you're seeing 2 results there. You're seeing the name of a company and you're seeing the name of a system. It's the system that is being marked, if I can put it that way, as being noted as being part of the Leadership Club. So our Universal Core Banking Systems, we're recognizing Temenos Transact from Temenos and TCS Banks from TCS Financial Solutions. Ram, what can we say about these systems?
Well, Temenos has been the market leader in this segment for almost the last 5 years. They have actually been, Temenos Transact is a solution that the platform that is actually being referred here. We actually had, the deals that were reported in the category of Universal Core Banking were about totally across all suppliers were about 116, and Temenos almost had about 40% of the market share there. And they have actually got deals across APAC as well as Europe and in the Americas. Talking about TCS, and we're talking about TCS Banks, they actually have performed, across regions. Again, they've got about 5 deals in Europe, 5 in Middle East Africa, and 3 in APAC, which is obviously distributed, gives you a representation across regions. And more importantly, TCS Banks has also been part of the SLT Leadership Club last year. So that's important to recognize there.
Okay, let's move on to our next category, retail banking systems. And here we recognize Intellect IGCB from Intellect Design Arena and Systematics from FIS. What's the gen on Intellect Design Arena's Intellect IGCB?
Intellect IGCB again has been a leader for second time in a row in this category. They obviously are, the solution is an end-to-end solution, in the way they position themselves. And I guess more importantly, in this particular category, we had close to about 37 deals reported, and the share of Intellect was almost 20% there. So it gives you an indication of the leadership position in this category there.
Any comment you want to make about Systematics, or should we move on?
Well, I mean, the Systematics, again, they can see they're part of the leadership club, and their presence has been significant in the APAC region, if I should make that reference there.
So to wholesale banking and treasury and capital market. And in our leadership club here, we have MX3 from Murex and Calypso from Calypso. What's the status of the leaders here?
Well, we do know that these two players are indeed global leaders in this space for some time. Murex specifically has been the number one last year as well. And they've retained that position again this year. And in their case, I would say that 35% of deals came from Europe, and both the Americas and European market have contributed roughly about 25% each. So it gives a variety of the deals over the geographies as well.
All right, moving on, private banking and wealth management. Amlot Banking Suite from Avaloq and Olympic from ERI. Private banking and wealth management is probably an area that is going to grow in importance for technology, I would think, given that those personal meetings over the bottle of wine that you used to have with your wealth advisor, if you were rich enough to have a wealth advisor, which sadly I'm not, probably aren't taking place anymore. So we'll skip right along to our next category, which is lending. And in the leadership club here, we have Sopra financing platform from Sopra Banking Software and FinOne Neo from Nucleus Software. Ram, any thoughts here?
I think it's interesting to see Sopra financing platform. They've actually been holding the top spot for almost the fourth year in a row. And again, 45% of the deals have come from Europe. You see them about 18% coming from the Middle East, Africa, APAC, and Americas each. So it gives again an indication that it's in alignment with what you see as global trends in investments made by banks in the lending category.
Okay, next category is Islamic banking, and familiar names I'm sure for people in this sector. Path Solutions IMAL is in our leadership club, as is Temenos Transact from Temenos. This is, you mentioned a moment ago that Sopra had been in the leadership club for 4 years in a row. Path has been in the leadership club for even longer than that, hasn't it?
That's true. Path has done pretty well in this space. They've always maintained their number one position for almost 8 years in a row, if I'm not wrong. And they have been recognized for this leadership position over the years. And they've actually had some pretty interesting wins this year. Although I must also mention that Temenos has also been, as part of the leadership club for a while. And, they had one of the largest Islamic banks in Saudi Arabia last year as their customer. So you're right. And it's an interesting picture to see Path number one and Temenos out there in the leadership club.
Okay, digital banking and channels. Digital banking getting more and more important, obviously, in the face of COVID-19. And we have Temenos Infinity from Temenos and Xylon Digital Banking Solution from iExceed. This is the Temenos as a company appearing again, but this is not the same piece of, this is not the same system. It's not the same piece of software that they were being recognized for before. So what can we say here, Ram?
Again, Temenos has retained its leadership position this year from where they had in the last year as well. And their deals have also been spread around the world. You find them to be, between Europe, Middle East, as well as APAC. But I guess it's very interesting to see the performance of iExceed, right? I mean, this is also a young company, but actually has been quite well recognized by global audience. You find them to be part of the Digital Leadership Club since 2016. And it's interestingly, almost 2/3 of their deals have been coming from the APAC region, which is interesting to see their significant market share there. And their customers have actually been both tier 1 as well as tier 2 banks, reflecting the reason why they are in the leadership club there.
Now, you mentioned earlier, Ram, that we've split payment systems into 2 categories for the first time. So let's unveil who's done what there. In retail payments, a familiar name, Temenos again. Temenos Payments is the system in question, and UP Retail Payment Solution from ACI Worldwide. What's the secret with Temenos?
Well, they did win this last year as well, and I could say that almost roughly about 35 to 40% of the deals that were reported in this category were with Temenos Payments. And I guess it's also a reflection of how aligned is this offering to what is actually being offered by the Temenos platform, and that's probably indicative of their dominance in this market, and well done there. And obviously you see ACI is a close competitor when it comes to the retail payment space.
Well, let's move on to wholesale payments. And what's interesting as much as anything else for me here is ACI appearing again. UP Real-Time Payment Solutions from ACI and Volpay Ecosystem from Volante Technologies. How significant is it that we see a difference between retail payments and wholesale payments?
As I mentioned, Robin, we have made this distinction this year more because the profile or the kind of deals or investments made by banks are quite different when it comes to retail payments and wholesale. And we did want to actually make that distinction here. But what's interesting about the performance of the suppliers here, by the way, Volante is behind ACI by just 1 deal. So they actually have been, a great performer there as well. And you do see that, the whole idea of having strong corporate relationships as the way goes, you see banks investing more and more in the wholesale payment space. So if I was to pick an area that you would see a lot of action in the coming years, this definitely is one of them.
Okay, moving on, wholesale banking, transaction banking. Intellect Design Arena, Intellect IGTB, and Finastra's Fusion Trade Innovation. This is also payments was not a new category, splitting them was new, but this is a new category this year, isn't it?
That's correct. That's correct. And I guess it was almost inevitable that we had this new category created there, Robin. We obviously see many banks looking to drive their digital transaction banking agenda, even more so, post-COVID. And you do see investments in this space being carved out. And the nature of deals that we actually see here is an indication of where the trend is from a banking technology trend standpoint. Again, Intellect IGTB, they have been recognized to be a leader here. New category, and they've been the first to actually be qualifying themselves to be the leader in that space as number one. And what they claim is that almost 23% of world's MNC cross-border sweeps are actually through IGDB systems, and that's quite an interesting number that is out there. Finastra's Fusion Trade Innovation is obviously, a very close competitor, as you can see here when it comes to transaction banking.
Okay, let's move on to another new category now for this year, and that's compliance management. Again, this has been spun out of a previous agglomerated category of risk and compliance. In compliance management, we recognize Univius anti-money laundering solution and Univius FATCA CRS solution from Infrasoft Technologies and Amlot from 3i Infotech. Compliance management, what are we seeing here? What are the trends here?
Well, we actually had almost like 14 different suppliers competing in this space, and we had almost like about 116 deals reported globally in this space, and Infrasoft has actually been an undisputed leader in the number of deals that they actually have. Almost, should I say, what we're seeing here is almost 70% of the deals globally in the compliance management space has actually been backed by Infrasoft. This again is a new category that we created, as you rightly pointed out. And interestingly, almost 2/3 of the deals that Infrasoft clocked was from Middle East Africa, but not to forget that almost 20% was from Europe and another 10-15% from APAC. So they actually have been spread around globally, which is an indication of how their performance has been last year.
Okay, well, we split compliance management out from risk and compliance management. So let's move to risk management. And the systems we recognize here are Temenos Risk and Compliance from Temenos and MX3 from Murex. So this is perhaps the other side of that coin. We split out compliance. What are we seeing in terms of risk management? What's the activity here?
Well, we actually again had about close to 12 different suppliers competing in the risk management space. And historically, it's been an interesting segment that we have been tracking. Temenos actually had almost 10 more deals than what it actually got last year, indicating that they actually are getting stronger in this space. And Murex has actually again performed, much better than their last year's performance in risk and have actually been the runner-up. So again, a very interesting space you see there in the risk between these two players. And of course, there are others, as I mentioned, there are 12 of them that actually competed here.
Okay, moving on, investment and fund management. TCS Banks from TCS Financial Solutions and Moneyware Wealth Management, Moneyware Asset Management from EBIX Cash Financial Technologies. Investment and fund management as a business has taken a bit of a battering in the last few months, but that's not what we're focusing on here. It's how the business itself is being managed, how the business is being run. What are we seeing in this arena?
Well, it's very interesting to see TCS Banks. They've retained their leadership position in this space. They have a very large market share. Almost 50% of the market share of the deals last year was from TCS Banks, and they have obviously performed well across regions. We had almost 9 suppliers competing in this space, with TCS Banks positioned as number 1 and IBIX Cash not very far away, and they're number 2, and what we're calling as SLT leaders here.
Okay, pure play digital only banks. This is going to be an arena that's going to get more and more crowded as the years progress because more and more digital institutions are being launched. We recognize here actually 3 companies' systems. Fusion Essence from Finastra, Pinnacle Core Banking, Pinnacle Customer Information, and Pinnacle Payments from EdgeVerve. Well, it's Pinnacle, but it's EdgeVerve, and then it's Infosys because one name is not good enough for the company, I assume. And we also recognize here TCS Banks and TCS Financial Solutions. Ram, what can we say here?
I think you've summed it very well, Robin. I think if you look at the profile of deals, this is a segment that is emerging, what we call as pure play digital only banks. I mean, this is to recognize as a segment or as a category that is becoming very critical in terms of where the world is moving. And, we actually had asked suppliers to qualify if any of their deals were with pure play digital only banks. And interestingly, we had about 13 suppliers whose deals qualified, in this segment. And interestingly, all these three players, Edgeworth, Finastra, and TCS banks had equal number of deals that qualified them to be, up there.
Well, as I say, this is a segment that's only going to get bigger. If you look around the world, there are more and more digital bank licenses being granted, and it's the coming thing. Regulators aren't talking about offering banking licenses; they're talking about offering digital banking licenses. So it's going to get busier. One to watch for the future, perhaps. Let's move on to our regional leaders now. And we start with the Americas, where we recognize Temenos Transact from Temenos and Cyberbank Digital from Technisys. Ram, Temenos appearing again.
That's right. At this time for Temenos Transact, which obviously is the Temenos Infinity solution out here, you see there is in the Americas category. We actually had, if you look at and this is not considering the domestic deals. These are international deals, and there were about 137 that got counted. And Temenos was number one. But very interesting player, Technisys out there. Their Cyberbank digital solution, they actually had, it's again a very, very powerful position from a digital banking and channel standpoint. We had close to about 25 suppliers who've been competing in this space. And what we see here between Temenos and Technisys are the leaders in this category.
Well, let's move on to our next region, which is APAC. And our regional leaders in APAC are Epsilon Digital Banking Solutions from iExceed, Young and Hungry, as I believe you mentioned earlier on, and from Temenos, Temenos Payments, Temenos Transact, and Temenos Risk and Compliance. APAC, busy area for, amongst other things, as I mentioned, the new banking licenses that are coming on. So there's business to be done in APAC. What do we see in APAC?
Well, I mean, I mentioned, the Americas had about 137. APAC actually had twice as much. We had 260 deals across various categories that were reported in APAC. 35 different suppliers operating, who have been profiled in the SLT. And interesting to see iExceed very active. They've been active in India, in Indonesia, in Cambodia. And as I mentioned earlier, they've been pretty active in the APAC region, and no surprises there that they actually are number one. But Temenos has not been very far behind. They have actually been very active again in the APAC space, in their payment solution, the Temenos Transact solution, as well as the Temenos Risk and Compliance. So,
okay,
both of them qualify to be up there.
Right, let's move to our next region then, Europe, and there's a familiar name: Temenos Risk and Compliance, Temenos Transact, and Temenos Payments. That's the same triumvirate from Temenos, and this also a familiar name: Univius FATCA CRS solution from Infrasoft Technologies. What's going on in Europe?
215 deals and 27 suppliers who've been participating from the European region. And as you see there, Temenos, between these three solutions, by the way, each of these solutions individually have actually been having the rank of being the number one, which is why all those three are being called here. It's not this, some of them, but individual solutions there. And Infrasoft, again, they've been, in this category, they've been a new entrant and very well done there, Infrasoft. They've obviously been significantly benefiting from the compliance management space, which is their, where they have a very strong play, and that's actually helped them catapult to be in the leadership position in the European market.
All right, the last of our four global regions is MEA, the Middle East and Africa. And here we see Univius anti-money laundering solution from Infrasoft Technologies, and Temenos Risk and Compliance from Temenos. Is it still the case, Ram, that the Middle East and Africa as an area offers maybe the greatest potential for growth, for activity?
Well, if I told you they have 277 deals in Middle East Africa that got counted across categories, much more than the others, that answers that question there. And you find that, if you take Infrasoft, for example, who's number one there, they've actually been doing well both in Middle East and Africa. Now, for example, a very large part of the deals came from the UAE, Bahrain, Ghana, and Kenya, right? I mean, that's very interesting to see that. And again, they're
both West Africa, East Africa, and the Middle East itself.
That's right. That's right. And again, if you look at the context of Temenos, they've also been pretty active both in Middle East and Africa. And, to complete that circle, it's also North Africa. They've been pretty active with the Egyptian market, for example, and that kind of explains how the regional play has unfolded there.
Okay, let's drill down a little bit now into the domestic markets that you were talking about. And we have, I can't see the screen. You're going to have to tell me. It's Finastra from Finastra and part of my screen's covered. FIS.
That's right.
Let's move on to our next domestic leaders in India, and we have three companies being recognized here, or three sets of softwares: Infrasoft Technologies, Nucleus Software, and IBS Cash. Ram, what can we say about the market in India?
Well, as I mentioned, I think these are to do with domestic deals. These are, for the domestic play, where you have banks such as cooperative banks or small finance banks or payment banks who actually have been procuring or taking the services of suppliers within the region, and which is why we kind of called it out separately. And quite interestingly, you'll find that there were 19 suppliers who've been operating in that category. Infrasoft again is number one there, and they've been very, very active with urban cooperative and rural cooperative banks. And compliance management again has been the single biggest contributor to that number there. And you can see they are, these are cutting across categories. Nucleus is actually in the lending space, and IBS Cash is more in the investment fund management space.
Okay, our third domestic marketplace that we look at is Russia. So our domestic leaders in Russia are Flexsoft and Inversia. So Russia is an interesting marketplace.
Well, it is. I mean, we actually had, almost 22 domestic deals done by the local Russian banks with the local players, which is not an international competition, like similar to what I spoke about in India. And we have these two suppliers there, Flexsoft and Inversia. And Inversia, for example, has been clocking the deals in both retail payments and wholesale payments and in transaction banking. And that's also indicative of where the market is going up there.
Right, now let's step back from the focus on countries. We only look at the three specific domestic marketplaces. Let's look at the world overall, global leadership and product breadth of global leadership. And we have three companies we recognize here: Finastra, Infrasoft Technologies, and, surprise, surprise, Temenos. Ram, what's the shape of the world in terms of product breadth?
Well, I think this is more of a leadership that we wanted to recognize this year, Robin, for the variety of the breadth of products that each of these suppliers are offering across the various categories that we are recognizing the ranking for. So when a supplier has offering across different categories and has been selling, obviously it's a function of the ranking is based on the number of deals clocked across various products. You do find that these are the top three players: Finastra, Infrasoft, and Temenos.
Okay, and finally in the Leadership Club for 2020, we stick with the idea of global leadership, but we want to look at the geographic spread. And again, we see three companies' names popping up here: Temenos, Infrasoft Technologies, and Finastra.
That's an interesting, and we obviously wanted to make this recognition, Robin, because the sales league table is truly a global performance measure. And as I mentioned, we had deals from close to 150 countries, or 150 countries where deals were struck last year have been reported and evaluated as part of this SLT. So Temenos, for example, is number one with, having executed deals in more than 45 countries, right? Infrasoft, about 35 countries. So these are the leadership that you're seeing here is a function of the number of countries that they actually have executed deals. And that's an indication also of how the world is increasingly becoming a flat place.
Well, yeah. Well, no, let's just revise that slightly. It was becoming a flat place. We're in a new world as of the last few months, but one of the advantages, of course, of this industry is that actually you don't need to sit in front of somebody face to face to get the job done. It can be done remotely, and we've proved that over the last 3 to 4 months, I think, not just as a business ourselves, but I think everybody in this industry has proved that it can work, they can work successfully and efficiently by doing so remotely.
Absolutely. So shall we move to the SLT stars here?
Let's move on to the SLT stars. And the SLT stars recognize those people who were just outside the Leadership Club, but are still worth remarking upon. And as you said yourself, Ram, earlier, the fact that everybody in the sales league table is remarkable performance in 2019. So Universal Core Banking, ICS Banks Islamic. Retail Banking Systems, Band Total Core and FinCraft Core. Wholesale Banking, Treasury and Capital Markets, Profile Softwares, AcumenNet. Private Banking and Wealth Management, Finartis and its Prospero Wealth Management. Lending, E+ from I'm not even sure, I'm going to be embarrassed now. How do I pronounce that one, Ram?
Gabi FSI, E+.
Thank you so much. Islamic Banking, ICBS, E+, and my screen is covering up the third one. Who's number 3?
Systems, Ababil, yeah.
Digital Banking and Channels, Backbase for its digital banking platform. And BPC's Smart Vista for retail payment systems. IMS Enterprise Messaging Hub from ECS Fin in wholesale payment systems. vTransact eCollect from MindGate in wholesale banking and transaction banking. And there's a whole team for compliance management. Eagle from Aseco, Auto Compliance from Autosoft, Capital Compliance from Capital Banking Solutions, Cobis Inclusion from Cobis, and finally Ram.
Clarify from Customer XPS.
Clarify from Customer XPS. In risk management, the credit risk management platform offered by Actico. Helios and BPO from Objectway in investment and fund management.
That's pretty much what we have there.
And that's, it's enough, isn't it? My goodness me. Congratulations to all concerned, performers all. Can you reiterate for us, Ram, what the importance of this is? Why are we doing this? Why do you put yourself through this? What is the importance of the sales league table for these suppliers and others, and how is it useful for the banks?
Let's actually break this into two parts there, Robin. I think first I'll probably talk about the suppliers before I move to the banks. Historically, these suppliers who actually have been operating in the banking technology space have found the sales league table to be a true benchmark barometer to not only look at how they've performed against their peer group in the industry. I think that's one part of it. But the second part of it is where they also get to understand how the demands for these kind of products and services they are offering have changed or are changing every year. So it's a true indication of how the way forward strategy and the product roadmap that they are building has to be aligned with the kind of developments in the marketplace. But when it comes to banks, I would say that, look, I've been helping banks over the years in evaluating and selecting and making sure they actually make the right investment in solutions that cuts across various categories. And I could pretty much tell you that every bank that makes an investment would want to be reassured that that's the solution that has been bought or is being invested by their peer group, not only in their own region, but globally. And here is the platform that gives you that validation in as many words as I just explained it, where the validation is through a very diligent process. And what you have at the end of the day is a confirmation that these are indeed the players who have been selling, and this is where they are selling, and how they've been ranking against their own peer group, and what that makes as a takeaway for the bank before they make a decision to invest in the platform.
Okay, thanks for that. So this is something that is definitely of value to the audience.
There is one question, if I may actually, I see from a panelist, from a attendee here. Will we get to know more about this? Will you be able to provide us with information?
Well, yes, the answer to that, of course, is yes, indeed, we can provide people with information, but the information that they want is not being given away. This is what you get, people, for free. If you want to know more detail and more analysis about the systems involved, the regions involved, the countries involved. I mentioned this at the top of the webinar, so I'm going to do it again. This is the advertisement. Please go to ibsintelligence.com and order your copy of the special issue for June of the IBS Journal, which has the complete sales league table analysis in it. Special issue of the magazine, available to order on ibsintelligence.com. I've got another question for you, Ram, from the audience, if I may. And this is enthusiastic, since we're only just talking about 2019 and the 2020 SLT. Somebody wants to know, what do we think about 2021? How is this year going to pan out? Can we say anything, or is it too early to say?
Crystal gazing, maybe. I could maybe do a little bit of my indulgence here, if you permit, Robin. Look, from what we are seeing in the last 3 years, and what we certainly can also make of the COVID situation, one thing is for sure. Investments that banks are likely to make are more likely to be in the new focus areas, as we spoke about, which are, should I say, applications that are to do with areas like payments, digital channels, transaction banking, areas that actually are needing to be overhauled or improvised from a technology standpoint in order for business to actually render those new services in the digital world. Not to say the others are unimportant, but I'm just trying to see where the likely impact or the likely preferences are expected to be. Well, I may be proven wrong, but time will tell.